Okay, let's speak with Martin Jacques. He's author of When China Rules the World. Martin has taught at various universities in China and Japan and lived in Hong Kong from 1998 to 2001. He joins us this morning from London. Thank you for being here, Martin. The Hong Kong government has little room to give in talks this Friday. Are the negotiations set to fail, and could this trigger more chaos on Hong Kong streets, do you think?
Well, I agree that there probably isn't very much room to manoeuvre, but there probably is a bit, and I think that both the Hong Kong authorities and actually in the background the Chinese government have shown a certain concern to have some kind of relationship or dialogue and not to act precipitously. So I think we might see something moving forward slightly. But at the end of the day, I don't really expect, for example, the Chinese National People's Congress Standing Committee to, in any fundamental way, change the rules for the election.
In which case, what are you talking about when you say there is a bit of wiggle room then? What sort of concessions do you expect the government to make?
Well, I suppose, there could be a series of discussions which don't get very far, but maybe, I suppose the most one could expect is a slight change in the proportion of that any candidate has to achieve on the nominating committee to get on the ballot paper. I suppose there might be a very slight change. I think that too is rather unlikely, but I suppose it's not impossible.
The protesters have to realise as well that China just isn't going to be willing to grant Hong Kong universal suffrage. What can Beijing realistically do to address their demands and also some of their concerns surrounding the democratic movement in Hong Kong?
Well, let me correct you. It's not true that they're not going to cede universal suffrage, because they've been quite consistent. There is going to be universal suffrage ever since, soon after the Basic Law, when they announced that the chief executive would be elected by universal suffrage in 2017. The argument is over the range of choice. And the feeling of the protesters is that the choice isn't going to be wide enough. So I think that's what's been at the heart of the issue. And I think that if I could, I think the difference between the protesters and the Hong Kong government and the Chinese is actually can be summed up very simply. The Chinese very innovatively for Hong Kong at the time of the handover proposed one country, two systems. And basically I think the Hong Kong protesters are only talking about two systems, and the Chinese are talking about one country, two systems with some emphasis on the one country. And that, I think, is the difference.
Well, innovative's a questionable word to use there, but the other thing that...
No, that's wrong. It is not a questionable word to use. Because what the Chinese proposed was something which is unfamiliar in Western in the Western nation-state tradition, but is very familiar in the Chinese context of a civilizational state. China's only held together over such a long period because of its willingness to be flexible about granting several systems at any time, in the imperial period and in the communist period. So this is very important, and it's I don't think one should dismiss it just because it's not familiar to us.
But they're not exactly being flexible in this instance, and also the other issue that protesters...
Well, look, when it comes to one country, two systems, which other part of China, because Hong Kong is part of China, which other part of China has the right to its own legal system based on continuing based on British law, which has rule of law, and which has this kind of political system? There isn't one. This is extraordinary. When you got, for example, the unification of Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall, East Germany completely disappeared, and that has been the nation-state tradition. So I think we should respect the Chinese in this context. I think and I'll go further than that, and that is, I think the Chinese have been very honourable about their implementation of one country, two systems since 1997.
Well, it certainly is true, but at the same time, when Hong Kong was ceded to Britain, Hong Kong wasn't under communist rule at the time. But I do want to move on and touch on.
Look, let's get our history right. Britain took Hong Kong from China as a result of the First Opium War. That was the illegal seizure of what became a British colony for 155 years.
Well, I do have to move on to our next point. The protesters also want Chief Executive CY Leung to resign. What good would that do exactly?
None. I mean, I think that I don't really see the point of this demand. I mean, because they're exasperated. I think it probably, the use of the tear gas and the pepper spray and so on, which I think was completely unnecessary and was a misstep by the authorities, I think provoked this kind of reaction. Of course, fortunately, the government then realised it had made a mistake and stopped using that and basically withdrew the police from the streets, which was a good move. But I agree with you. I don't think that demand is going to achieve anything particularly. And, it's not as if he's a particularly he's not a confrontational leader. He comes across as reasonable. I mean, he's always been controversial, but that was partly because of the way the other main candidate was pulled out, had to back down because he was caught in corruption.
All right, well, I'm afraid we have to end that discussion there, but thank you very much indeed for that. Martin Jacques, author of When China Rules the World, speaking with us from London there.